As we learned in the opening conversation in the series with Professor Josh Angrist, teaching and mentoring advanced students is the main task of academia, including in research institutions. But I noticed a strange phenomena, I told him. In my experience, sometimes it is not our best students who go on to having a scientific career, and many of our faculty members do not attach much importance to the mentoring of the next generation. And this disturbs me, so I asked Professor Angrist, are we, as an institution, maximizing our human capital? What does it take to be a successful student? And what is the formula for mentors who develop the next generation of researchers? Is there really a chance that we are losing out on our best students?
You might, but talent is multidimensional. What is talent? What does it take to be a successful scholar? It's like asking, what does it take to be a successful athlete? A successful runner is not just somebody who can run fast, but they have to be disciplined, and they have to be willing to trade, and they have to be willing to lose sometimes and continue to compete. And in academia, the equivalent of sort of raw physical talent is intelligence, IQ or something like that. To be intellectually precocious, to be able to think through problems. And in the case of disciplines like economics and mathematics and some of the hard sciences, there's sort of a mathematical processing power element. But I know there are lots of smart people. Few of them will be successful scholars, and few of them could be successful scholars because they don't have the other kind of elements, which is persistence and a desire to kind of keep hacking away at something even when they're failing. And the ability to both work alone and work with other people. So there's sort of an emotional maturity to it. And you need some combination of all those things. Now, each successful scholar is different. Some people are very, very bright, but they don't work well with other people, and they'll still have good careers and make good contributions. But other people will be more in the other direction. But they'll be more balanced. They won't have the intellectual firepower that they can immediately solve problems in their head, but they'll be very good at putting teams together and coordinating a joint effort. Anyway, it'll take some package. And, the ability to package those things and produce a successful research career is relatively rare. Most of my students, I don't want to speak about my students personally, but most MIT students, in spite of the fact that we're one of the top PhD programs in economics, we would say the top. And we have a distinguished history of graduate education going back to the 1940s. And yet, very few of our students will have significant research careers. Very few, maybe 10%. Meaning they publish a lot of papers over a long period, and those papers are read and cited.
But do we max out as an institution? Are we not losing? Is it a natural selection that makes MIT and Harvard the best because we max out through selection the best?
Well, it's a great question, is how could we get more research done? And why do so many people flame out or never really get going? And if I knew that, I would open my own university. It's a little bit like, again, it's like professional sports. I wish I had the secret sauce to produce Michael Jordans. Mm-hmm. I'd have a very good team if I could do that. If I knew how to go, not even produce, if I knew how to go into high school basketball programs and find the people who are going to be stars, I could sell that. But it's just like in sports, it's very hard to know. And you have a lot of talent initially, and people look talented, but they're not very successful in the end.
You make the metaphor of sports where coaches are extremely important.
I don't know if that's true. That might be true.
Okay.
That might be true, but it might not. Coaches will tell you that's true. Is that true? It's a thing somebody could study. I'm sure there's papers about it because there is a discipline of sport data science and sport economics. I don't know if that's true. To what extent that's true? Is the coach, how much value added does a coach add? That's a real question. And how much of it is just that they kind of find the right people? Well, there are very successful advisors. There are a handful of faculty who are not always the most prolific scholars, who are nevertheless the most productive advisors. It's super concentrated. And, I know them all by name in terms of living scholars. There are people like David Card, who was one of my advisors, and Orly Ashenfelter, who was also one of my advisors. And Whitney Newey was my third advisor. And Ashenfelter and Card have advised, between them, hundreds of very successful scholars. And Newey has advised dozens of very successful econometricians. And there's just a handful of other people like that. Larry Katz at Harvard has advised lots of people who've had distinguished research careers. And Jim Paterba at MIT has advised many, many public finance and health economics. And Jerry Hausman has advised many graduate students. And Jim Heckman, you mentioned, and Gary Becker have had many successful students. But, these kind of turbo advisors, I can count them on my two hands. And, I don't think they could quite tell you what it is that they do. Because if they did, they would, and then you would do it too. So there is this sort of question about cultivating human talent. Nobody has the recipe for that. You'd like to have a recipe for that, because of course, human talent is a wonderful thing, and people accomplish great things. So you'd like to know how to nurture that. Ashenfelter has had so many successful students, and Ashenfelter's students have students. So it cascades. Ashenfelter has children like me, and I have my students and their children, so Ashenfelter's great-grandchildren. And that, by the way, is incredibly rare. So there's a website called the Math Genealogy Project, which covers economics and statistics. And you can go there and you can look at a given scholar and you can look at their descendants. So you can see, I have a certain number of descendants. Now, the coverage is imperfect, so maybe the coverage is only 50%, but you get a sense of it. And one thing you see is how concentrated the advising is. So a few advisors have most of the descendants, and even fewer have another generation. In other words, grandchildren. I have quite a few students, but relatively few students, maybe only 5 or 6, that also have successful students. And then, it sort of doesn't pass down through the generations very robustly. The kind of descendancy that I'm talking about is literally, I have an advisee, and do they have advisees? And that peters out very quickly. And for most people, it ends at the first generation. Most people's students do not have students. I don't know what it looks like in other disciplines, but I'm guessing it's similar. Because it's hard to know what to do to produce successful scholars. And you might be a successful researcher, but that doesn't mean you know how to produce a new generation. Or maybe it's just there's a lot of randomness and it doesn't happen very often, and so it's not going to happen to you most of the time. It's true, though, one thing I like about economics, I was just talking to, I have a co-teacher here this week who's a graduate student named Matan Kollerman, who's a PhD student at Hebrew University, and we're teaching together. He'll get a PhD from Hebrew University. So he's not going to get a PhD from MIT or Harvard or Chicago or Princeton or Stanford. But that doesn't matter that much in economics. That's what I believe. Anybody who does good work and makes the effort to communicate that work, which is also a project, to be able to write effectively. But if they put the work in and the work is good. They put the effort into communication, and the work is good. It'll get noticed, and people won't say, "Oh, that guy went to Hebrew University. Who cares?" That won't be a strike against you. It may be a little bit harder to get started, but by no means fatal.